So this morning, as I already mentioned, we are beginning a new series through the month of October. It's 5 Sundays. It's called What's Yours is Yours. For the sake of being vulnerable, I oftentimes don't get very nervous about speaking. I don't know how many times I've spoken in my lifetime. This one I'm a little bit nervous. I think there's a lot of great content for us to take a look at. A lot of as I was studying this week and even last week, preparing for today, this morning, was challenged a little bit as well. One of the things that many of you may not realize is my wife and I actually celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, something like that. Yeah, just a few weeks ago. Yeah, 15 years. Can you believe that she put up with me for 15 years? That was a joke as well. You can laugh, okay? Thank you. But one of the things that I've seen within our marriage, I remember we met, and my first, one of our first conversations, she's talking about, wanting to be married one day and wanting to have kids, and I remember I said to her, I said, Connie, and I was 23, she was 19. And I said to her, I said, yeah, I don't think I want to get married till I'm about 30 and have kids till I'm about 35. And her eyes just like bug out of her head, right? And what's amazing about a beautiful woman is by the time I turned 35, we were married and had 4 kids. So, and she is more than just beautiful on the outside. She has challenged me so much in my life, and I look at the last 15 years and how much I will tell you what she has told me. I have matured, okay? So I won't stand here and say, hey, I've matured. But I do believe that she has helped shape me and form me. And one of the areas that just a maturing process I think that we have gone through within our relationship, within our marriage, is this maturing around the idea of money and what is money and what does it represent in our society and our culture, and what does God say about this? And so a lot of what I'm talking about is stuff that we have had to walk through and we've had to learn ourselves in those 15 years. And for that, I'm grateful for. But one of the things is we talk about this idea of maturing, and what I just described to you as she has helped form me is something the scriptures called discipleship in a lot of ways, right, guys? As she has helped disciple me in certain areas of my life to grow and move into a further place of maturity. And it's something that we are all called to do as believers, is to walk with others again in this idea of community and help somebody else further mature in their walk with Christ. And so in a lot of ways, if we don't do that as followers of Jesus, we're in a lot of ways being disobedient, okay? But for the sake of going down a rabbit trail and talking about one of my favorite topics of discipleship, back to this idea of finances, Martin Luther was one of he was back in the 1500s, and he was a part of the radical reformation of the Catholic Church. A lot of the Protestant movement of the church came through Martin Luther. He tacked up his theses on the door of the church. And he said this, he said that when a person decides to follow Christ, he said first there's a conversion of the heart. Then he said there's a conversion of the mind. And then get this, he says there's a conversion of the purse. Just this idea of how much of our belongings is tied to our maturing, to our maturity in Christ. Another dude, John Wesley. I just love these like dead church guys. John Wesley was part of the 1700s. He was a part of the initial founding of the Methodist movement. And he had this to say. He said, the last thing to convert in a person's life is their wallet. Those are some pretty powerful statements, not about money, but pretty powerful statements about our maturity in Christ. This idea that the conversion of the wallet, this idea of one of the last things to mature in our life, is to convert is a person's wallet. These are speaking into this idea of a maturity as we move towards Christ. And I had the opportunity this last week to go to D.C. And I was in D.C. working with some other church planners that I get the privilege to work with. And a lot of what we talked about was this idea of how do we integrate the church back into the neighborhood, and how do we be present within a place as a community. And I'm so excited we talked about that because I was able to sit there and say, hey, we're doing that, right? We have a new group that just started in Salem area. It's a great opportunity for you to invest and get involved and build relationships if you're not in a group yet, as that is the newest group forming. And there's other groups in Level Green and Lynn Haven. We're looking at a possible fourth. But anyways, all that aside, as I'm sitting there, I'm riding the subway back and forth from my meetings and stuff, from the hotel to the meetings. And the meetings happen to be in Capitol Hill of all places, right? So we're at the Mecca center of the United States government for these meetings. And I have to speak on finances this Sunday. I'm riding the metro, and you know what pops into my mind? The movie Matrix. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching people move like robots, from one place to another place, dressed however they needed to be dressed in order for the job that they were going to. But I sat there and I thought to myself, this is like the Matrix. Have you guys ever seen the Matrix movies? Some of you? Yeah. And it just dawned on me how much of our society we are embedded within it, and how much of our society consumerism we live in and may not realize it. Again, I was thinking, I was trying to understand how much of this society we're embedded within, and how much does consumerism shape my life? And I started thinking of all these different examples. One of them I thought of was Black Friday. Black Friday, and I don't have a thing against Black Friday, but so I'm not coming from a place of biasness. But I pulled up on a website, and there is a website dedicated to the number of people that are injured or killed because of Black Friday. And I'm just reading through this list, and Thanksgiving shopper hit by car at Walmart. Black Friday brawl at Kohl's. 3 arrests. Shopper pepper sprayed, arrested in argument over a TV in Walmart. So maybe the moral of the story is stay away from Walmart. No, I'm kidding. Man stabbed during Black Friday event at, Carlsbad Mall. Maybe Carlsbad. Let me see. Virginia man stabbed in Walmart parking lot over a parking space. So this is happening, and they have examples here from Ireland and from some other places. This is happening all over the place. And so I'm trying to take all this in, how much our society is consumed by this idea of consumerism, by materialism. And I couldn't help but think of this song. Listen to this. For some of you, this will be like a blast from the past. For others of you, you'll be like, I've never heard this song before. But take a listen to this song. Can we pull that up? That's good. We could probably stop. Thanks, man. So I have a quick question. I'm going to take a measurement here. What I loved about that is I saw some people in the audience go, oh, yeah. I saw others go, Like, what is that? So I'm curious, how many of you guys know who that is? Any about half of, not even half. Oh my goodness, thank you. Yes, Janis Joplin. I thought it'd be better coming from Janice herself than actually me. So, but you know, and again, I don't have anything against Mercedes-Benz. I don't have anything against color TVs. I'm going to watch a football game later on a colored TV. But what I'm getting at is how much of our culture we live within, like the Matrix shows, right? And so many of those sci-fi movies show realities to us that we don't realize are realities. But again, how much we live within this culture that shapes us and we don't even realize it. There's a quote here I want to read to you. It says, this is by a guy named Dick Staub. He's a radio syndicate. He's an author, a futurist. He said this. He said, the largest companies in the world are spending billions of dollars to drive a diversionary, mindless, celebrity-fueled popular culture down the highway of new technologies and into our lives in order to sell us stuff we don't want or need. Did you guys catch that? To sell us stuff we don't want or need. He said they don't care about us, what we believe, or how we want to live. He says the ads and products regularly reduce women to sex objects and men to devourers and predators. They are unconcerned with what is in our best interests, spiritually or intellectually. And in fact, it is in their best interest to keep us spiritually desensitized and dumb. They play to our unhappiness, magnifying the feeling that we are missing something essential, and then if we had this something they offer, we would be fulfilled. They then encourage us to shop, convincing us that shopping will do today what it failed to do yesterday. To fill what a French religious philosopher, Pascal, some of you guys probably read him in math books, he entitled something called the God-shaped vacuum. And so this author is, again, just emphasizing the point that we live within a culture that magnifies this idea of consumerism, that magnifies that I will be happy when I attain this product. I will be happy when I have this kind of figure. We are controlled in so many ways by this idea of consumerism that we live within this culture and we don't even realize it. How is that for a heavy introduction? And so, analyzing the culture, I was curious what the scriptures had to say. And I wanted to find somebody in the scriptures that actually understood wealth, right? Because most of the disciples probably did not have much wealth as we understand. So I wanted to understand somebody that had wealth, what their take was on wealth. And so I stumbled across this guy named Solomon. And Solomon was actually the wealthiest man to ever live. They claim, in this history, they claim that he had more money than Donald Trump and Bill Gates combined. Can you imagine that? And even so much that the Queen of Sheba went to visit Solomon, and it says here in 2 Chronicles, it says, and she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it. And behold, half the greatness of your wisdom was not told me. You surpass the report that I heard. Happy are your wives, happy are these your servants who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God who has delighted in you and set you on his throne as king for the Lord your God. And it says, because your God loved Israel and would establish them forever, he has made you king over them, that you may execute justice and righteousness, Then she gave him a gift, and it was 120 talents of gold. She gave him a great quantity of spices and precious stones. It says there were no spices such as those that the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. I looked, and it estimates that her gift to Solomon was worth about $3.5 million. So he gave her a tour of his chariots, of his stables, the horses he had from I think they were where were they? Egyptian horses maybe. But she gave him a tour of all that he had, right? And all these wives. It's estimated this dude had like 800 some wives, and plus another so many concubines, right? And so this was a guy that consumed everything that he could consume and had everything that we would sit back and say, that is success. Queen of Sheba walks in and says, I'm impressed. But then King Solomon writes later in his life, his dying days, I think this is something to take note of. He said, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money. This is a man that could buy anything he wanted. Nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity, it says. Then he said, there is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt. I'm sorry, but how much of this describes our culture? And not the culture that we live in, but the culture that we even create as followers of Jesus. These are some pretty convicting words. This was interesting. I found 1923, they got 9 of the wealthiest businessmen together in one room. 1923. Did you know that Monopoly, the game Monopoly, came out of the Great Depression? Did you guys know that? Anybody know that? The game Monopoly came out of the Great Depression. What is the goal of Monopoly? To own it all and make you pay me for it, right? Yeah. 1923, 9 of the most famous and successful businessmen gathered in Chicago. There were guys there like this one you might recognize, Charles Schwab. He was president of the world's largest steel company at the time. Samuel Insull, president of the world's largest electric company. Howard Hobson, president of the world's largest gas company. It sounds like you need to get in utility business. Arthur Cooten, the great wheat speculator, whatever that is. Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange. Albert Fall, secretary of the Interior in President Harding's cabinet. Jesse Livermore, the greatest bear on Wall Street. 2 more. Ivor Kroger, head of the world's greatest monopoly, and Leon Fraser, president of the Bank of International Settlements. Now, these are some pretty high-profile people. 9 of these guys, they gathered together in Chicago, and statistics showed that 25 years later, I want you to hear what happened to these men. Charles Schwab, 25 years later, was forced into bankruptcy and died penniless. Samuel Insull, 25 years later, died a fugitive from justice, penniless in a foreign country. Howard Hobson, he died in an insane asylum, penniless. Richard Whitney, 25 years later, he was released from Sing Sing prison and was penniless. Albert Fall, 25 years later, was pardoned from prison so he could die at home. And then the other 4 committed suicide. I'm sorry, but that's telling. That is telling that almost 100 years ago, 9 of the wealthiest men in the world gathered together in Chicago only 25 years later to die with nothing, and half of them took their own life. This is the culture that we find ourselves trapped within. And many of us, if we're not careful, we live ignorant to that culture. This idea of money and greed and anxiety over those things that we have or those things that we don't have. A consumerism that is almost like a spirituality in a lot of ways. It controls us. And we let it control us. And I'm just as guilty. I mean, why is it that one of the most relaxing things to do is take 4 kids and walk through the mall and let them go play in the play area? One, it's free, right? But to window shop around the mall, how many of us will go do that when we have some free time because it's relaxing? Amen, sister. Amen. But we are controlled by this idea of consumerism. Did you know that in marketing and branding, there's something called expressive capital? Has anybody heard that term before? Expressive capital? No? Expressive capital is this idea that marketers use that if I can help create a space within your cognitive thinking and within this intrinsic desire within you to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and this intrinsic desire within you to be a part of something bigger than yourself. There's a spirituality within there. And expressive capital is the marketing and branding companies take that concept and they say, if I can help you believe that this thing that you're intrinsically desiring is not a larger, it's not a divine creator, it's not a divine God that you're intrinsically hungering and thirsting for, but it's product A over product B. This is real life marketing. Now, I'm not up here to try to say there's conspiracy theories all over the place. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, we live in a broken world where all of us have this intrinsic desire to be a part of something bigger, to be a part of a community that is bigger than ourselves, to be on mission for something that is bigger than ourselves. And you know what the marketing industry has done? I think they've been brilliant. It's a spark of brilliance. Hey, what you're missing is product A over product B. Because if I can get you to fall in love with product B, then we pursue product B. And product B could be anywhere from, now I'm a part of this community that loves holy jeans. Now I'm a part of this community that loves gray shirts with black designs. Now I'm a part of this community that drives this kind of vehicle, that lives in this kind of house. And many of us, we think that this idea of expressive capitalism only relates to those that are wealthy. It is so far from the truth. They are able to connect with us in what Pascal called this God-shaped vacuum. You know it, I know it, that there is something desperately missing in our lives. My hope is that many of us in this room have come to the place that we realize what was missing was walking with this divine creator, the God Almighty, Jesus Christ himself. But we walk in this world that calls for our attention in so many ways. Shopping becomes, at that point, a spiritual transaction, a spiritual action. My friend, that is religion. I want us this series to talk about financial freedom. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with some of the stuff that we have. But it's when that desire for more kicks in. Not based upon need, but based upon want. And many of those things that we say we need are really not things that we need. What does financial freedom look like? Are you in a place that you can honestly say that the society, the culture, the consumerism that I live in does not affect me? Are you in a place where you could say, I could go do whatever God tells me to do tomorrow? There's nothing keeping me from doing that. My fear is that many of us can't because of debt, because of stuff. And I wonder if it's one of the greatest tools the enemy uses to hold us back from all that God calls us to. Now, I'm not speaking to you arrogantly like, hey, look at me. And I hope that some of you are not sitting there saying, hey, I got all that together. Because really you're missing the point. That's a posture of arrogance. I'm speaking to us all together as a community. What would it look like if we had financial freedom? Not in the sense that when I mention financial freedom, many of us can go to this thought of liberty. And we want to pursue liberty. And many of us are involved in securing liberty for our nation, right? And so I'm not saying there's anything wrong with liberty, but I think a drastic turn is where we go from financial freedom to liberty to choice. And then choice quickly becomes consumption. Because it's the culture that we live in. I think it's amazing that Jesus said you can't worship God and money. Jesus talked more about money than he talked about anything else except one thing. One thing Jesus talked more about than money. One thing. It was about his coming kingdom. I think we have to reposture ourselves. Jesus said some pretty crazy things. Jesus said things like, to live is, I'm going to mess it all up. That's why I wrote it down. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. I mean, what does that even mean? To live is Christ and to die is gain. What does that even mean? He called us to be the least of these. How are you practicing being the least of these? He called us to be servant masters. I'm looking at this and I'm wondering to myself, we kind of just talked about this earlier in the year when we looked at the Beatitudes. In the Beatitudes, it says, as Jesus opened his mouth, he taught this. Jesus said this. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the kingdom of earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. I mean, that's contrary to what we're talking about. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. As the band comes up and continues to lead us in worship, I want you to think, how much does the society that we live in control how we view our finances? I was reading this week, and I was convicted of something. Yeah, a crime. The body in my backyard. I was convicted. I was reading. The church wants to talk a lot about, I'm just going to say it, sexual issues in our society. And I think in the process of that, we exclude a lot of people from the grace of who God is. I'm not going to get into deep theological conversations. You can go back and listen to a podcast that you might have missed a few weeks ago when Pastor Jeff shared. But we want to talk about sexual issues. We don't want to talk about financial issues. I've never seen a war break out over sexual issues. I've seen wars break out over financial issues. What would happen if the church decided to get their finances straight? What would happen if the church became the generous people that we're called to be? What would happen if the church, when a need broke out, the church was able to come around? Because the church wasn't carrying all this financial baggage. That was my conviction as I read this week. Part of following Jesus is Jesus convicts us and then we move towards repentance. My prayer is that you this morning have been convicted in some way. Not because God is a God that wants us to walk in guilt. God is a God who wants us to walk in freedom. God is a God who doesn't bring guilt, but He does bring conviction, because conviction brings repentance, which brings life. I've got 6 things here. I want you to take your Connect card this morning, and I want you to write on here what it is the Lord is challenging you to do from today's talk. Because it's easy for us to walk out those doors and say, wow, that felt good. I was challenged a little bit. But if we walk out those doors and do nothing with that challenge, then what was the point of my breath? What was the point of our time together? If it doesn't deepen us and say, Lord, I need to know you more. I need to taste of you. And so I thought, cheated a little bit from this book that was a great resource. Maybe a simple challenge for you is to go watch the Matrix movies. Seriously. Maybe that's a challenge for you, to go watch those and be reminded of this society, the culture that we live in. Maybe number 2 is be generous until it hurts. And I'm not even saying be generous back to the church. That's some other stuff we'll talk about down the road. Just be generous until it hurts. $5 is not generous. $5 is a cup of coffee. Whoops, I lost it. There we go. Number 3, humble yourselves. Maybe you got to go back and read those Beatitudes and say, Lord, where are you challenging me? That's Beatitudes, Matthew 5, verses 2 through 11. Maybe 4 is simplify your life. Go home and look through everything that you spend money on. And we're going to talk about some of that. I'm excited for the coming series because this was just setting the landscape for why this is an important conversation. Later in the series, we're going to have some others share with us about debt. How do we get rid of debt? How do we consolidate debt? Talk about savings. What does that look like in our culture? Talk about giving. What does that look like in our culture? Talk about work. How do we approach work? So I'm excited about this series. Again, this morning was kind of setting the stage to say this is an important conversation that you need to be a part of. But get a jump start, maybe go home and look through where you spend and say, where can I simplify? Cable, football packages, restaurants, toys. We spend a lot of money. We have no idea where it goes. I was guilty of that 1.5 years ago. Advertising. Maybe you say, you know what? I'm going to take a binge from all advertising. I'm not going to watch any advertisements for a month. Maybe no TV for a month. I don't know. What is the Lord challenging you to do? Lastly, unless this is a surrender before Jesus, unless this is a surrender of us before God himself, everything is just a religious act. So maybe you're sitting here this morning and your next step is to say, Lord, I've made my stuff, God, over you. This morning I need to surrender to you. Whatever that looks like for you, let's stand, let's worship, and ask the Lord to say, Lord, what would you have me do as I leave here this morning? And I hope you would write that on your card, because I want to be a part of praying for that. We want to be a part of helping with that. Let's stand and let's continue to worship.